So to continue on with the card manager, let's go back into our config folder. Let's make sure we have a card.php file. In here, we just want to return an array. So what we can do in here is we can store a few different things for the card, for example. So let's start out with just having a session in here called session. And then card key is just going to be card session. Perfect. So if we now head back into our code, I'm just going to close that off. We don't need that anymore. Let's create a function that check if the card exists. Return this session has, and let's just check config card.session dot card session. And then let's just make sure this also has an instance, which we're gonna work on now. So let's create a protected instance in here. Or we could just call it card. It depends if you want to call it card or instance. So let's just call this card instead. So let's head back in here now. And we have this card model here. So every time we basically create a new card, what we basically want to do is, I think we can actually get rid of this function for now, just to make it simpler. So if we head back in here now and create a create function, and let's just start out with creating a card. So let's say card, and then call this card make. And then if user exists, we will just pass that through up here. We will just say instance card, in this case, sorry, where we say user associated. Perfect. And then we also want to say card save, and we want to say this session put config, and we can just copy this bit over. And in this case, just call this card ID. Perfect. All right, so that's now sorted. So problem number one, we need to head back into card model, because A, we don't need this add functionality anymore. We're not doing that in the model. B, we don't have a UID. So when this is creating, we want to say parent boot. You could even move this into observer, actually. That may be better for this instance, just so we have a card observer. So if you open back up the terminal, let's say we create a PHP artisan, make observer, and call this card observer. Perfect. Now let's register it. So inside the card model, let's just create, when creating, let's say parent boot, and let's say static creating function pass in the card. Say card ID equals str uid card save. So this will automatically do this in the background now. Just need to make sure as well that we inside our model set the card model as well. Make sure that let's just pass in the card for now. Don't even have to save it actually. Make sure we pass this through as a string. And it's not when we're creating, it's when we're doing booted instead. Okay, so it's still not existing, but let's fix that now. So now what we want to do is we want to say instead, just say get card. So I don't think we created this function. Oh, we did create this function. Perfect. So in here, we just want to return the card. And you want to say if this card exists. Perfect. In that case, then we want to just return this card. Otherwise, we want to return this card equals card where card ID is the same as config is the same as this session get config card session to card ID. Just making sure we got this right. So card.php in here we want to make sure we have card.session.card key. And the same here. And we just want to grab the first one. Perfect. Let's hit back in. So we are basically creating a card with die dumping if it exists. And that's basically what we're doing here. So let's take a back look, take a look in here again. So in here we are essentially creating the card, and my question is now, can we simplify this? Yes, we can. So if we head in here and return card, instead, if it doesn't exist, we can just say this create. And if we then head back into the home controller, we can get rid of that function. No, actually that's creating an issue there, sorry. So let's just leave it like it is for now. But at the moment, this will allow us to essentially retrieve the card, assuming we always have this existing. Let's head back into the cards table here. And let's make sure in here that we want to do card create. Perfect. And then what we can basically now do is we can use this card here. But we can also, instead of using card exist, let's see what happens if we just use this card get card. At the moment we get null. So if we say card get card, we're getting a model. And as you can see, unfortunately, we still have the issue where it doesn't save the session, it's saved in the database. Okay, let's make sure we always have card middleware that exists. So let's create a make middleware. Let's just call this card middleware. And inside card middleware, we just want to go ahead and say we just want to create a card. So let's just go in and say card equals app card manager class. And let's say if card does not exist, then in that case, let's head back in here and say this card should create based on the request user, and otherwise we just return next. So that's only if it doesn't exist. And then we can have inside to our kernel and we can add in the card middleware. So now it's always creating a card for us. So we don't even have to call this function now. Let's set the session driver for, in this case, instead, let's just go ahead and set that for file. Hit refresh. Just delete all of those. And let's head back into home controller. Let's pass through the card to here. And let's say home.blade.php. And let's print on card. We can also now say card get card. And you can see we now stick with the same one because we're using the session driver as file. If I now head back in and I log in, we now want to make sure that we always associate this with the users. So we don't have to use get card, but what we basically want to say is, so if we now head back into the card middleware, in here, let's say we now know that we have this card here. Let's say if request user, let's say in this case, card associate with user. Now we want to go ahead and create this function. So inside our card manager, let's just create a function here called associate with user. This card and we can just say in this case user ID is then going to be equal to of ID, this card save, and that's basically all it should do. So if we head back into the card middleware, let's see what happens. We now have it with a use ID. So that's how we can easily now manage a card, create one, check if it exists, and also let's make sure we update the card interface here. So in here, let's make sure we have exist. Get card is already there, that's fine. Outside of that, what else can we do? We can go in here and check. We have get subtotal already there, that's perfect. We want to have this associate with user. There we go. And yeah, so basically now we have the ability to add items to a card. So let's head back into this. Here, I'm gonna close down a couple of items here. I just want to go into the home controller and I want to add an item basically. So what we want to do in here is we want to pass through various different items. So if you remember inside our card items here, we have the product ID and or a variant ID. So first and foremost, we want to have product ID, which is always there, and then we want to have variant ID, which can be set to null. And we also want to make sure we have this pass through inside our function here in the add function. We can just set it as null as default, that's fine. Let's leave it like that, perfect. All right, so we want to have the card item model, and we want to essentially make, so let's call this item. And then here we then want to say item product ID is going to be equal to product ID and item save. But on top of that, we also want to just go ahead and see what else do we have. We have a card ID, and this card ID, to avoid confusion, is this card ID. Perfect. All right. So let's also say that if variant ID exists, we want to pass that in there. So let's basically go in here now and create a function here checking for variant ID, and there we go. So let's head into our home controller and let's just say card add 1. Let's head back into our products table where we're adding ID number 1 in. Attempt to read property ID on null. So what we can do instead here is actually just say this get card ID because we are returning a card. Oh, and variant ID, let's just double check here. So inside create card items, we forgot to make this nullable. So let's just make this nullable. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do this inside the card items structure here. You can do it by either remigrating the items or heading in somewhere else. But let's just make sure. Okay, so not null variation, null value, column ID, variant ID. Oh, I'm obviously editing the card ID. Let's go down here and make sure we're editing the right one. Perfect. Heading back in. We also want to specify the quantity. So let's say item quantity. In this case, this is going to be equal to quantity. But for now, we'll set it to 1. We'll pass in the quantity here later on. For now, we don't really want to be able to do anything but add it in here. Alright, so with that done, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to close a few things here. So the only other thing I want to make sure we do now is go to a card model. And in here, we want to make sure we also use as many. So all I want to be able to do now is in home controller, inside home.blade.php, let's set in here. And instead of saying get card like that, we can say get card with items. And you can see we now have product ID, and every time we refresh, we're adding a new product ID. So obviously this is not ideal. We don't want to add a product ID ranging like that. We want to be able to select it from the product selector. But that's all for this video. Sorry for the duration of the video, but it is quite a complicated project to work on. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next video.